Hey guys, Liana here, and it's Tata's Tuesday, and I'm continuing with sort of the post airplay wrap up because it's a starting point to talk about stuff, and it's a starting point for mainstream people who don't necessarily, follow the minutiae of games, but are curious about this because it did break the mainstream. So I'm not, unfortunately, the name Gamergate is there, and that polarizes people to an unfortunate degree. But those of you who listen to this channel recognize that I'm a big fan of not being afraid of words. So I'm not going to avoid a perfectly valid topic because the term Gamergate is involved. And people unfortunately think, well, I'll get to this in a bit. Anyway, I wanted to touch on one of Michael Koretsky's statements about, now, to be clear, this general post about how I feel about the whole thing, I'm pretty much in the same place he is. I thought the morning panel was great. I thought the afternoon panel was not so well. It was just starting to get decent when it was shut down. They were just trying to get things that started to settle down, and they had to leave. But it shouldn't take an hour for things to settle down. And the difference to me was because the morning one was a discussion. As he says, it wasn't even a debate. It was a discussion. The afternoon was theater. The afternoon was more like what you see on TV, which a given topic is just an excuse for people to show up and grandstand. And there was a lot more of that in the afternoon. Because I won't get into because you can come up, you can come up with things yourself. What I didn't like is the fact that there was actually a hashtag shut up Koretsky that started. I didn't know because I don't read comments for these things. I don't like being biased by comments. I'm here to provide analysis of the actual content, not what other people thought about the content. What do you need me for to tell me what other people thought, right? More and more, whereas the shut up Koretsky hashtag, anyway, it's here somewhere. I'll post the link to this video so people can read it themselves. But here it is, shut up Koretsky. This to me is unacceptable. This sort of thing. This is the same thing that happened to that woman that, made a ill thought out tweet about AIDS in Africa and lost her job and got ganged up on the internet. You don't start a hashtag telling someone to shut up. I personally support Koretsky and the way he handled it. And the most glorious moment for me in that whole afternoon session was when he said, "This is not about feminism." And that made me very happy because, unfortunately, not just in Gamergate, in gaming discussions in general, feminism is used as a weapon, a smokescreen, and, a distraction from other things, because we don't have a feminist wing of the game press right now. We have people's personal opinions labeled as feminism, and it becomes all these personality politics. And so I wanted to talk about, because he rightly so, he's saying what happens next. What happens next? And obviously, not to be too glib about it's not about feminism. Let's face it, Gamergate is a huge backlash against what people understand is feminism in gaming. A feminism in media debate, it could be great. What is he talking about this? A feminism in media debate would be great if it had ground rules. Now, based on what I saw from Airplay, I would trust Michael Koretsky to do that. That being said, I would much prefer, I think it's more productive to see a debate among feminists or among feminists and people who are neutral, not among feminists and anti-feminists, because we're talking about a war that has raged at least since the 1970s with that. And the problem with that is the anti-feminist route in the 1970s. I think we can understand a bit more why people are like, well, what do we need? A militant feminist movement trying to make radical changes now. In the 1970s, it was quite different. I mean, anybody who saw Mad Men knows that things were pretty different for women back then. And so a lot of the anti-feminist rhetoric now sounds very similar to the stuff in the 1970s. And that is concerning to me because it is the same root. The groups driving the anti-feminist movement have their roots in these groups in the 1970s who were opposed to change. I mean, could you imagine an anti-civil rights? We're talking Westboro Baptist Church territory at this time, at this point. Anti-gay rights, black rights, we'd call those groups what they are, wouldn't we? But there's all this mess surrounding men and women that we don't recognize that there is a massive difference between not identifying as a feminist, which is your choice. That's a totally valid choice to not be a feminist, and be actively opposed to it, to be an anti-feminist based on one wing of a movement that does a lot of good. And I think, I would like my contributions to games to be more wide-reaching than just my gender, right? Just references on my gender. But unfortunately, there's, not enough people talking about this stuff from a rational perspective and a measured, I won't say moderate, because I don't consider myself a moderate. A moderate, unfortunately, is someone who doesn't feel one way or the other with this right now, or somebody who supports the advancement of women but doesn't understand why we need the name feminist, right? I take a bit of issue, with this. What if I hosted a feminism and media debate with these three on one side? Well, you're talking about a panel with Kathy Young, who I believe describes herself as a feminist, Christina Hoff Sommers, who definitely describes herself as a feminist, and Milo Yiannopoulos, who is an avowed anti-feminist. Now, these three can get along for reasons that probably have nothing to do with that element of their politics, but they would not be on the same side. And it's disturbing to me that this trend that continued, just because those two women were sitting next to him, next to Yiannopoulos, people automatically assume they espouse the same views. And that's just not the case, okay? And that's not fair. That's a generalization. And this is why we need to talk about this stuff. And where I want to start is the idea that video games have a feminism problem. And I will give you that. There is a dysfunction right now in the gaming industry when it comes to talking about women's issues. I will call them women's issues instead of feminism so that people don't get all freaky, okay? I do these things to compromise because I want people to actually listen to me instead of standing on ceremony. But I thought about this, and okay, I accept that there is a problem in the way we talk about it, the lack of productivity in talking about women's issues in video games. So how do we solve it? My solution is more people interested in talking about women's issues. I want to take the Muppets approach. At the end of the Muppets movie where they're like, look at me, here I am, right where I belong. And they do the song. But Kermit's solution to the lack of acceptance of a show about cows and pigs and chickens and things is a show with more cows and pigs and chickens and things. And that to me is the path forward, because right now It's like going into a restaurant and having one thing on the menu or three things on the menu. There's not enough variety, right? There aren't enough different versions of an approach to women's issues in video games so that people can find the one they're comfortable with and can best learn from. Because it's not just about raw data, is it? It's about tone. It's about presentation. People learn in different ways. And what I've heard is that there's a real need for someone who actually talks about women's issues as a gamer, somebody who actually identifies as a gamer so that, we use the language that people use. The problem is, how the hell do we get that off the ground when there is such a strong anti-feminist sentiment within gaming? Okay, you're fighting a war on two fronts, and that's never a good idea tactically. So here are some things to get us started. And I want to talk about some myths and they are myths. I'm not going to waste your time citing papers and things like that, because these are not things that are in one paper. Okay, guys who listen to this YouTube channel, and I use guys as a gender neutral term. People who watch this YouTube channel know I don't base things just based on one study. There's gotta be multiple studies, and the issues with the quote unquote science that people are using to perpetuate anti-feminist sentiment in tech came from the fact that the actual methods used to collect the original things that led to the myths were actually biased along gendered assumptions in their collection methods. And that's a serious issue in science. I mean, asking the right question is massive. It's an issue in reporting as well. You have to know how to ask the right questions. I'd say that's about 70%. And then your actual, excellence in data collection is the other 30. You've got to know what questions to ask. Tea break, hold on. So the biggest myth, I think, right now involving video game feminism right now is that we're actually having a discussion about video game feminism. What? Hear me out. We're not having a discussion based on professional thought right now. We're having a discussion based on a series of radical personal opinions from charismatic personalities, right? And by charismatic, I don't necessarily mean that all these people are erudite or well-spoken. I'm saying there's something about them that is like a car wreck. People just can't look away. And that is a form of charisma, right? Those of you who know that from playing D&D, charisma is its own score. And somebody doesn't necessarily have to be a good person or a particularly ordered person to be charismatic. It's its own thing. Somebody can be a hot freaking mess, and you're still just drawn to that mess, right? That's what we're talking about here. And there's been too much where, well, this is feminism or this is what women think. And it's like, no, we're really only getting our information from 3 to 5 sources, aren't we? And in an industry as large as gaming, that's not enough. Like, and we have the same issue with race and sexuality and all this stuff. But with women specifically, because that's the one I watch most closely, men are given the license to speak as individuals on a topic. This is just my opinion. Women are forced into this paradigm where it's like you have to speak for all women everywhere or you're some sort of traitor, right? Or people's opinions are just assumed to be what women think. And, that's not fair. That's not fair to anybody. That's what that one woman and her writers think. Okay? Or that's what one woman and her dev team thinks. But we're in the era of intersectional feminism, which means there are other things that come into play with this. And I get so pissed off every time people jump from Anita Sarkeesian to Bell Hooks, for example, because you cannot separate Bell Hooks's experiences based on race to her experiences based on being a woman. And that's the significance of bell hooks. The significance of bell hooks is not that she's always right. There is no philosopher, there is no thinker who is always right. What's interesting about bell hooks is that she has a unique perspective and she says it with passion. She is a voice in the discussion, but you cannot take bell hooks's opinions as a black woman and, shift it to a westernized what is Anita? She Persian by extraction? Whatever. She's from another place. She's a completely different background ethnically. You cannot just shift that perspective and not have signal loss. Okay? So leave bell hooks out of this. It doesn't matter about bell hooks. Okay? I have influences that range from Robin Morgan, who is virulently militant, especially in the 70s. And I don't agree with everything. But there are a couple of essays I thought were brilliant. Gloria Steinem has a completely different tone. There's people like Kate Millett who were probably severely mentally ill, but she did some interesting things as an artist. Germaine Greer's early work has validity, even if now it's like, what was she on about? You can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Because guess what? There's impurities in all bathwater, so you're just going to be constantly throwing out the baby. And the problem is people zero in on these personalities and their backgrounds and their origins and the whole thing because we are so invested in those personalities instead of invested in their thoughts. We're not good in gaming at developing new personalities because there's not enough money to go around and everybody's scared. Right? So people would rather maintain status quo, keep the same 3, 4 women, 5 women that people go to for commentary on games, even though they all come from backgrounds and educational backgrounds and socioeconomic backgrounds that are a little too similar to really be productive, right? We do need more diversity there. We need more diversity of voice because, to remind you again, we have too much personal opinion currently be passed off as professional thought. So we're seeing, and why does this matter? It's always the why. Remember a couple days ago I talked about the who, what, when, where, why, and how? Yeah, this is the why. We're seeing overcorrections in what developers do based on this, so-called professional feminist feedback, which is actually people's personal opinions. We're seeing overcorrections. And it's because our sample size is too small and these opinions actually don't reflect what, women everywhere want. And so developers think they're fixing a problem. They're working in good faith when in fact they're just alienating the people who like their products to appease the people who didn't, right? And that is an issue. That's not good for business. So I think to summarize this point, how different can personal approaches to feminism be? Well, very different. Okay. What's one person's cultural appropriation is someone else's inclusion, right? To me, it really hit home because growing up in high school, one of the things I advocated for was teen mothers. There was an issue in our neighborhood. There were, there were issues with women dropping out of school, and not having effective resources, and teen pregnancy is an issue in itself, but it's also a symptom of other things. The thing I found so mind-blowingly compelling working with these women, well, first of all, I got to see them as people instead of statistics. And that was huge, right? And I know how powerful that was for me. And I want to see this in gaming as well. I want people to start looking as women, as women, as individuals, the same way I learned to look at teen mothers as individuals with their own stories, right? That was actually the project, is getting teen mothers to tell their own stories. And then we would act them out because some of them were too shy to perform their own stories. But it's powerful. It really changes your thinking and makes it much more productive when you start seeing any sort of group of people as people instead of statistics or instead of a class. Okay? Because a class doesn't think for itself. A class is a grouping used for, expediency that isn't necessarily completely accurate. The middle class, for instance, well, there's people still living check to check. And then there's, people who can buy a new TV every year. They're still considered middle class, right? Class can lie. And I think the first thing gaming has to do is start seeing individual women as individuals. And women as a class is useful for some things. It's not useful here because of that intersectional component, that there are too many other variables when you're developing a game for a certain audience. It's not just when you're like, okay, we want men. Well, you never just stop at men, do you? It's male 18 to 34, this income bracket. Sometimes it's race. It's much more specific. Your target audience, because you have your primary target, your secondary target, and then sort of your incidental markets, right? With women is we want women. But everybody's too afraid to right? And that's the issue. We need to start seeing women as women. My early approaches to feminism, modern third wave feminism, were trying to provide services for teen mothers so that they could complete their high school degrees. Okay? You would be amazed at how much friction we got from that because the school administrators didn't want pregnant girls walking around the school. They thought it would lead to a contagion effect and other girls would get pregnant for attention. I'm not kidding. And in this case, this is something that uniquely affects women because the guys tended to, complete their schooling. The baby became the woman's problem. They didn't shove the guy out of school. The guy who knocked the woman up, he wasn't subjected to this stigma. It was the women. So they didn't want to put change tables in the schools, and they didn't want to have daycares in the schools because they didn't want to encourage teen pregnancy, which shows that school administrators knew nothing about the factors going into teen pregnancy. But that is my form of third wave feminism. Of course, then in my last year of high school, we moved. I stayed at my school, but my sister went elsewhere, and feminism became much more like in that neighborhood. Feminism was much more the study of cliques and, middle class aggression and those sort of social forces. And it's not the same thing at all. I mean, one would say, well, okay, people finishing school and not being booted out of school for being pregnant, that's a real issue. Well, does someone being seriously affected by bullying, social aggressions are a very real issue, but each neighborhood was different. Both of those are women's issues. Now one would say, the lasting impact of not having a high school diploma is much higher. But that's subjective. I mean, we could talk about that. So what, somebody has a high school diploma if you're so messed up in the head that, you can't use it, you're non-functional. And this is where we don't need feminism in North America comes in, because I know we do. Those issues affecting teen pregnancy and teen sexuality, and the fact that women, just because women have babies, have more dire consequences placed on them that affect their entire lives based on engaging in uninformed sexual practices. And this is where we come into that issue, another myth affecting gaming, which is, men and women are just different. And I'm not going to get into the whole women with vaginas versus women without vaginas thing here. I will acknowledge that, yes, I understand that gender is a social construct. Sex is more of a biological one. And this is when we get into, unfortunately, we tend to interchange sex and gender. And I think this leads to a lot of discrepancy. And what's the difference, you ask? Well, we very rarely talk about biological sex in gaming. We tend to talk about gender. You know, that whole thing about Pac-Man has no identifiers and Ms. Pac-Man has a bow on her head and lipstick. That's what we tend to talk about. That's gender, right? That's gender. And Nintendo's so brilliant about this because they make Kirby pink, even though the literature refers to Kirby as a he. And the Toads, Toad and Toadette, they have no gender. They're mushroom people, but they have gender identifiers just based on what they like. And that's heady, what Nintendo's doing. I think that's really cool. But, the reality of ovaries and reproduction and things like that, that's what people tend to say when men and women are just different. Because there's one set of body parts that vary between men and women. But men and women have a lot of similarities too. And those similarities are often pushed aside because we're focusing on differences. And that leads to this idea that, it's just not for you. You just can't hack the rough and tumble world of game design. It's just not for women. It's not designed for women. Men or women are just different. That's okay. It's okay, women, that this isn't designed for you. And that's actually complete doublethink. The idea that men and women are different, so let's design a workplace where men can thrive. That's not what's happening. That's what was happening. I mean, that's the whole air conditioning thing. That's all it was. Is that formulas were created when men were predominantly, the predominant members of the workforce. That's changed now, and so offices are air conditioning space instead of people. When it used to be more people, more meat. There's less meat in an office now than there used to be. And instead of just going, there is less body mass, there is less heat expelled, there is less of something, we don't need to air condition so much, it turned into this massive war. And that comes from this whole men and women are just different. Well, if you accept that and you really are a proponent of equality, then you have to develop two streams. And they're, no, it's based on merit. No, merit has to be merit. Remember what I said about studies having gendered assumptions that actually throw off the results? Well, merit is the same way. If you have a gendered assumption about good versus bad, for instance, if you have an assumption that logic uber alle, as I say this all the time, logic over emotion all the time, well, that's your bias, isn't it? Now, unfortunately, we live in a world where logic is associated with masculinity and emotion is associated with femininity. That's just not true. But because of the history of the human race, anger is sort of taken off the table as an emotion. It's, seen as dryer lint or something like that. Psychological dryer lint. Anger's okay because anger is aggression. Anger motivates you. But those gentler emotions, well, they're considered potentially bad when they're not. Everybody has those emotions. How we express them is something different. But what we actually need in a workplace, what they found, is a combination of logic and compassion. When you get all logic and no compassion, you make bad decisions. So this whole idea of men and women are just different, you can believe that if you want, but that means you have to change your thinking accordingly. That means that if, you think there are inherent differences between the sexes, then you have to create an environment where women have equality of opportunity. And right now, gaming, the crunch alone has been something I've been concerned about for a really long time, because men shouldn't be working those hours and eating that junk and not sleeping and not going home and not seeing their families. We let that happen for too long because of this perception that men are supposed to be self-sacrificial. And that's a gendered construct as well, isn't it? Women and children first. And this is something I think has no place in a modern workplace. If you're burning men out and, giving them gallbladder, kidney, and liver trouble, that's not okay. But that's considered acceptable. And then we're like, oh, women just don't want to deal with that. Well, who wants to deal with that? Nobody wants to deal with that. Men feel like they have to deal with it. Women are like, I'm going to do something else. This is dumb. Because women, this is one of these women are different things. I personally think that women have a completely different attitudes towards energy conservation just because of that wonderful fact of life that is menstruation. Every 28 days, you are possibly going to feel like complete ass. And so you can't, you can't have this scramble all the time. You instinctively become more of a planner. Because it's like, well, every 4 weeks, that's something I'm going to have to deal with. Is that weakness? No, society has decided that's weakness. I think that's wisdom. And I think the business world could actually learn from this idea that, the wisdom of menstruation, if you will. Like, stop the crunches. You don't need them. A crunch is an indication of bad planning or something going terribly wrong. And crunches still happen and they're silly. It means you need more producers or a better producer and you need to hit your milestones. And I think that the crunch is one of those things that's keeping women out of the core design jobs, because who the hell wants to deal with that? That's crazy. I mean, the reality is, that it's balancing, but women are still more often the primary caregivers than men. And that becomes an issue with crunches too. And that's totally a social construct after the kid's born and you sort of heal from that and you stop breastfeeding. There's no reason that men can't stay home with kids as much as women do. That's societally, we've decided that. There's nothing biological about that. But, we do have that thing. Well, the women stay home with the kids, and then we go back to work at a disadvantage because we've lost those 2 years and we either have to start brand new with a job after being out of the workforce for 2 years, or we've lost those 2 years of pay increases, which is one of the things that leads to the wage gap in the same job. Okay, we're talking about a wage gap, 2 people doing the same job, different pay. And that's part of it, because as you work, you get these incremental increases. Well, you have a couple kids, you've lost 2 years of incremental increases, right? And there's no correction because the system's not set up for that. And the silly thing about that is, again, it's illogical. We need babies as a society. And it's funny to me that the people who are so anti-inclusionary when it comes to women should stay home with the kids. There's this huge cross-section of people who are also, I don't want those foreigners. Well, guess what? If women don't want to be financially dependent. And this is what it comes down to. If women don't want to be financially dependent, how the heck do women have babies in our current economic structure? There is a point in time where women are dependent financially. And that's something that should change, Part of the reason that everything's going contract and not full time is you don't have to pay maternity leave on contract. Like, think about that. And you don't have to pay paternity leave on contract. And to me, I think the solution to this is that as paternity leave becomes more common and we start seeing as many men taking as much time off as women for their kids, this inequality will decrease. But that inequality is still there. And that's something we really do have to talk about. Now, the last myth I want to talk about is going to be contentious because it's so ingrained. But it is a myth. And you can look this up. And like I said, it isn't just one paper. And I've even stopped posting studies because people tear them apart. And they tear them apart to a foolish degree, because they start going on about sample size, and the ignorance just starts coming out. They start basically saying, well, this study measured apples and I wanted it to study oranges, so it's bad. They're just showing they can't read a study. And so this myth is huge, that, men are more visually stimulated, or women aren't visually stimulated. Well, women aren't visually stimulated. The lie has been put to that thanks to Marvel, the Marvel films, because I don't know of very many women who talk about Thor's personality, right? The fact that they took the armored sleeves off his costume is an indication that, oh yes, some women are very much visually stimulated. It's there. I mean, Magic Mike, right? This is an instance where they actually found that gender bias in scientific research had a huge impact. They found that depending on the question asked, you got radically different results. And now they're able to measure things like brain activity and blood flow. And they actually find that the answers women give don't match what they're actually doing physiologically. So say, oh, no, I'm not attracted to that. But they find, increased blood flow to the lady parts. So that's very interesting. But it's also, they found the question changed when you removed an element of social stigma from the question. So what researchers have determined is that it's not actually men are more visually stimulated. It's that men are more socially encouraged to be visually stimulated. I would go one step further on that, because I have some friends, quite a few friends, who are into, you may have heard the term BBWs, big beautiful women. I know friends who are legit into that. That is the type of woman they like. And gaming doesn't factor in diversity in what visually stimulates people, right? Like it tends to be pale skin and a tiny waist and a girly voice, right? And that's not the only thing men are attracted to, right? That comes down to the racism inherent in the beauty myth. And, I was really sensitized by this by talking to African-American women, that, a white woman is considered status. A black woman isn't, except for, those leftist males who want to show how special they are and what great human beings they are. And, it's like that wonderful line in Blackish. It's like, okay, you got your black wife, now settle down, right? And they're allowed to make that joke because it's inside the culture, the same way gamers were allowed to make fun of gamers, but we get pissed off when anyone else does. This is a big issue, that even if we assume, okay, men are visually stimulated and women aren't so much, it's not true. But let's just, because it's so ingrained, let's even just look at what we've got, even with that stereotype in place. Because people are going to argue me, no, it's true. I read it somewhere, right? It doesn't matter that the science was bad, and science evolves and science improves, and that's why it's science and not, philosophy or, a worldview. It's intended to evolve and move and improve. But just because men are visually stimulated doesn't mean they're stimulated by a teeny tiny, bouncy, ponytailed, big boobs, small waist, modest butt white woman. That doesn't necessarily mean that is what attracts them. There is far more diversity in what men find attractive. What these women, for lack of a better term, we'll call them, the car model trope of women. What these women are is status symbols. And that has nothing to do with inherent attraction, and everything to do with, as I said, social status, a social reward for achievement. And this is where we start getting into women as trophies and all that stuff. And that's something for another time. But the point is that these representations of women are not based on what men actually find attractive, and catering, more accurately, catering to the widest variety of what men find attractive. The depictions of women in those roles in games are calibrated based on the type of woman that is seen as the greatest indicator of social status. And that has nothing to do with attractiveness. And this is the sort of thing that we need more discussion in games because, why? Well, the status symbol woman is changing, isn't it? The status symbol woman, it's not socially acceptable anymore to have the big busty fake boobs woman as your status symbol. No, now it's got to be emaciated all down the road. Right? She's got to be slim, right? But now it's a Mal Clooney, right? Now it's a woman who's just a twig, modest, B cup. B cup is the new D cup in terms of status. Is it still based on attractiveness? George Clooney probably, I'm assuming he finds her attractive. That's just what he likes. He likes skinny women. But not every man does. And, that's, everybody's like, oh, well, that's what, Amal Clooney and Princess Catherine and all that stuff. They are that trope. So this is the status symbol. This is what I'm supposed to like. And we go on down the road. As opposed to it being, no, I don't like, I don't like women that skinny. I like women with some meat on them. And that doesn't mean we get all the skinny women out of games. But what has so-called game feminism done? Okay, what has it done? What has been the actual achievement so far? Well, all gaming feminism did was aligned the depictions of women in gaming as status symbols to Hollywood's idea of what a status symbol is. Good job, feminism. You wonder why people are pissed. That's why people are pissed. That is counterproductive. That is showing that the current paradigm is failing. All we're doing is conforming. And that's because we have this idea feminism is not about you. Feminism is about a class. And the whole idea of feminism is supposed to be about creating improved opportunities for all women, not just some women. And the stuff that's in gaming right now only benefits some women. Who? The B-cup breasts and, the brown hair and the people who do not seem outside of that acceptable, this is a left-wing approved woman, right? Because we all the big fake boobs and blonde hair and all that stuff. Well, we know that's bad. So we're going to create our trophy based on opposition. And our trophy's better than your trophy because it doesn't have big boobs and blonde hair. It has small boobs and brown hair. But, oh, right. It serves the exact same social purpose, but we're not going to admit that. Oops. That's not feminism, folks. That's conformity. And again, we need more female characters in games. We can't diversify if everything's token, right? I mean, there should be more than one female character. So you can get, in Mass Effect, you've got Miranda, who was originally supposed to be blonde, but it didn't look good. So they changed her to a brunette. You've got Liara, you've got Tali. But the only thing that Mass Effect sort of failed on with the humanoid races is that there is very little change in body type. You've got Evie, who's literally a machine. But there wasn't the Zaftig, right, woman for the guys that like more cushion for the pushin', right? They were all fit, skinny women. And that's not true of the men. You had Solus, who's quite skinny. Oh, wow. I didn't realize that they recycled that name from Morden Solus, I'm referring to. You've got who's skinny. You've got what's his name? Esteban, the guy that does the push-ups for the gay guy. He's this big bulky guy, right? And you've got, you know, Shepard, who's sort of brown hair McNormal pants, and you got Garrus, who's got like a messed up face, and there's a lot more diversity in the men. They're all fit, right? But they're different kinds of fit. It's a body type thing. And just go to any dance studio and go into any competitive program and look at the difference in the body types. You've got some girls, like I just look like a gymnast back then, and I took nothing but crap because I didn't look like a ballerina. That's just the way my body went. I bulked up. I didn't have the lean muscle. I had thighs like tree trunks. I got those Celtic legs, right? And I was a base, meaning I was throwing kids around all day, so I had this really overdeveloped upper body. Wow, am I glad I don't have that anymore, because it was impossible to find anything that fit. But now I have an opposite problem, but I digress. And so even, you know, the most feminist companies out there have to really look at, I mean, you look at Dragon Age, it's the same thing, you know, other than Isabella, who was sort of bigger on top. The female body types all look very, very similar. And other things change. I mean, the great thing about Dragon Age is they actually have older female characters, which is amazing, right? I wish one of them was a romance option every so often. You know, put a cougar in. Put a cougar in. Don't just have people romancing young people. Because, I mean, let's face it. They always break up the love interests in BioWare games anyway. It never lasts. So who cares? You're basically picking on an extended fling. Because they break everybody up somehow. So why shouldn't it be a cougar? Cougar, 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 cougar. Come on. If you're going to put in pansexuals and you know, manic pixie dream girl lesbians, give me a cougar. But, you know, there's still assumptions at play. There's still acceptable forms of womanhood that are far more restrictive than acceptable forms of masculinity. And this is what we have to talk about in gaming. And to do that, we have to talk about the masculine and the feminine. We have to talk about representation, and we need a plurality of voices. Because why do we have so many different types of guys in games? Well, guys make games and put themselves in the game, so it just happened organically. We don't have women in those positions. I mean, we have, you know, Amy Hennig and Jane Raymond and stuff like that. You know, there's a reason that the women in Assassin's Creed kick fucking ass. And, you know, I give Amy Hennig credit to create that Elena Fisher character in Uncharted that was not the typical strong female character, right? She was more of a Girl Friday thing at the beginning and then evolved. And, you know, she did the Girl Friday femme fatale dichotomy because she was doing an adventure serial that was an homage to that kind of story, and that's okay. And I say this as somebody who found Elena Fisher profoundly annoying in the first game. She grew on me. And that's okay, right? But because Amy Hennig's female, she can do that from that place, you know, and just go, no, I will defend this, and this is why. If, you know, without somebody with that grounding, they're not going to feel empowered to go, no, I'm not going to go by the rule book here. I'm going to go with my gut because I know this from the inside. Somebody did not teach me about womanhood. I am a woman, right? And that's a radically different place to come from. And so there's my little extended explanation of how video games feminism problem will be solved by more feminism. Thank you. Please be respectful in your comments. And subscribe. Please subscribe. I need subscribers. Please subscribe. Subscribe.